Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing at the edge of the world, where the land meets the sea, where the waves crash against ancient rocks, and where the wind carries stories of those who dared to dream. This is a story about one of those dreamers, a story about a boy who had nothing but hope, and a man who learned that sometimes the greatest storms we face are the ones within ourselves. There was a lighthouse at the edge of a forgotten coastal town. It stood tall and solitary, a sentinel against the darkness, its light sweeping across the vast ocean every night. For generations, the lighthouse had been tended by the same family. And in this family, there was a boy named Elias. Elias was 17 when our story begins. He had dark, unruly hair that the sea wind could never quite tame, and eyes the color of storm clouds, gray, restless, searching. He lived in the shadow of that lighthouse with his father, an old keeper named Thomas, whose hands were weathered like driftwood and whose voice had grown quiet over the years. The town below the cliffs had long forgotten about them. People came and went. Tourists snapped photos of the lighthouse from a distance, but no one climbed the winding path anymore. No one cared about the keeper and his son. They were ghosts in their own home, invisible to a world that had moved on without them. Elias's mother had died when he was 7, an illness that came quietly in the winter and took her before spring could arrive. His father had never recovered. Thomas became a man of silence, speaking only when necessary, pouring all his grief into the maintenance of the lighthouse. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Thomas would climb the spiral staircase and light the great lamp, ensuring that sailors far out at sea could find their way home. But Elias, he wanted more. He would stand at the edge of the cliff, staring out at the endless ocean, wondering what lay beyond that line where the sky kissed the water. He had dreams of leaving, of finding his own path, of becoming someone the world would remember. Yet every time he thought of leaving, he would look back at his father's bent shoulders, at the way Thomas moved through life, like a man already halfway to the grave, and guilt would anchor him in place. "You're wasting your life here," his only friend, a girl named Clara from the town, would tell him. She had bright eyes and a laugh that could cut through fog. She was planning to leave for the city after the summer. "Come with me, Elias. There's nothing for you here but dust and ghosts." But Elias couldn't. Not yet. Not while his father needed him. So he stayed, day after day, helping with the lighthouse, watching the sea, feeling his dreams slip further and further away like ships disappearing over the horizon. One night, everything changed. It was the kind of night that felt heavy, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Elias was in the lighthouse's kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, bread, fish, and tea, when he heard the crash. It came from above, from the lamp room, a sound like thunder, like the world breaking apart. Elias dropped everything and ran. His heart pounded in his chest as he took the stairs 3 at a time, his mind racing with terrible possibilities. When he reached the top, he found his father collapsed on the floor, clutching his chest. The great lamp flickered above them, casting wild shadows across the walls. Thomas's face was pale, twisted in pain, and his breathing came in short, desperate gasps. "Dad!" Elias dropped to his knees beside him, hands shaking. "What happened? What's wrong?" Thomas tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His hand reached out, gripping Elias's arm with surprising strength, and his eyes, those tired, grief-stricken eyes, looked at his son with something Elias had never seen before: desperation, fear, and perhaps, underneath it all, a silent apology. Elias managed to get his father down the stairs, half carrying, half dragging him. He called for help on the old telephone in the keeper's quarters, his voice cracking with panic. The ambulance took forever to arrive. The lighthouse was so remote, so forgotten, and by the time they loaded Thomas onto the stretcher, Elias felt as if his entire world was being carried away with him. At the hospital, the doctor's words were clinical, detached. Heart attack, severe. He's stable now, but he needs rest. Weeks, maybe months. He can't work. He can't climb stairs. He certainly can't tend to a lighthouse. Elias sat in the harsh fluorescent light of the waiting room, his head in his hands. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like an iron cloak. There was no one else, no other family, no one to call. It was just him now. The lighthouse needed a keeper, and Elias was the only one left. The first few days after his father's collapse were a blur. Elias moved through them like a sleepwalker, going through the motions of keeping the lighthouse running while his mind was elsewhere, in hospital rooms, in memories, in the suffocating realization that his dreams had just been postponed indefinitely. He called Clara. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright and excited. She was packing, she told him. She'd found a small apartment in the city. She had a job lined up at a cafe, nothing special, but it was a start. She was leaving in 2 days. "Come with me," she said again, like she always did. "We can figure it out together." Elias stood in the lighthouse, the old telephone pressed to his ear, and looked around at the stone walls, the narrow windows, the endless spiral staircase. His prison. His duty. "I can't," he said quietly. "My father, he needs me." There was a pause on the other end, a long, heavy pause. "Elias," Clara said, and her voice had changed. It was softer now, tinged with something like pity. "You can't live your father's life for him. You can't sacrifice everything for someone who—" She stopped herself. "Who what?" Elias asked, though he knew what she was going to say. "Someone who's already given up," she finished gently. "Your father stopped living years ago, Elias. Don't let him take you down with him." Those words hit Elias like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to defend his father, to explain that Thomas was just grieving, that he was still in there somewhere. But the words wouldn't come, because deep down, Elias knew Clara was right. He said goodbye. He told her to have a good life. He told her he'd be fine. And when he hung up the phone, he stood in the silence of the lighthouse and let himself cry for the first time since his mother died. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Elias's life. Every day was the same, a monotonous cycle of maintenance, isolation, and crushing loneliness. He would wake before dawn, check the lamp mechanism, clean the lenses, record the weather in the logbook that no one read anymore. He would prepare meals he barely ate, visit his father in the hospital during the brief windows when visiting hours allowed, and return to the lighthouse as the sun set, ready to light the lamp once more. His father was recovering, but slowly. Thomas barely spoke during the visits. He would lie in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, occasionally mumbling about the lighthouse, about checking the lenses, about making sure the lamp was lit. It was as if the lighthouse was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. One evening, a nurse pulled Elias aside. She was a kind woman, middle-aged, with gentle eyes. "Your father talks about you," she said, "when you're not here. He worries about you." Elias felt a bitter laugh rise in his throat, but swallowed it down. "He has a funny way of showing it." "Grief does strange things to people," the nurse continued. "It can hollow them out, make them forget how to live, but it doesn't mean they don't care." Elias nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He left the hospital and drove back to the lighthouse through the gathering darkness, the narrow coastal road winding like a scar across the landscape. When he arrived, he climbed the stairs to the lamp room and looked out across the ocean. The sea was calm tonight, unusually so. The water stretched out like black glass, reflecting the first stars appearing in the sky. And for a moment, just a moment, Elias felt something shift inside him. He realized that he was angry. Furiously, devastatingly angry. Angry at his father for giving up. Angry at his mother for dying. Angry at himself for staying. Angry at the world for being so cruel, so indifferent. He wanted to scream, to tear the lighthouse apart with his bare hands, to run and never stop running. But instead, he sat down on the cold floor and let the anger wash over him, let it burn through him like a fever. It was on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after his father's heart attack, that Elias found the journal. He had been cleaning out the keeper's quarters, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, when he discovered it tucked beneath a loose floorboard in his father's room. The journal was old, its leather cover worn and cracked, the pages yellowed with age. Elias opened it carefully, expecting to find logbook entries or maintenance records. Instead, he found his father's handwriting, younger, steadier than it was now, filling page after page with thoughts, memories, and confessions. The entries began the year Elias's mother had gotten sick. Thomas wrote about his fear, his helplessness, his desperate prayers to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. He wrote about holding his wife's hand as she grew weaker, about the conversations they had in the deep hours of night when she couldn't sleep. "She made me promise," one entry read, "that I wouldn't let grief consume me, that I would keep living, keep finding joy, keep being a father to Elias. I promised her I would. I swore it. But God forgive me, I don't know how." Elias's hands trembled as he turned the pages. There were entries about him, about Elias as a child, about his curiosity, his questions about the world, his dreams of adventure. Thomas wrote about taking him down to the harbor, about Elias's face lighting up at the sight of the fishing boats, about how proud he was of his son's imagination. But as the entries continued, they grew darker. Thomas wrote about the weight of depression, about how it felt like drowning while everyone around you breathed easily. He wrote about wanting to be a better father, but not knowing how to pull himself out of the darkness. He wrote about watching Elias grow up and feeling like he was witnessing it from behind a wall of glass, present but separate, there but not really there. The most recent entry was dated just 2 days before the heart attack. It was short, only a few lines. "Elias wants to leave. I can see it in his eyes every day. He's staying because of me, and I hate myself for it. I've become his anchor, dragging him down to the bottom with me. He deserves better than this. He deserves better than me. I don't know how to let him go, but I have to find a way. Before it's too late. Before I ruin his life the way I've ruined my own." Elias closed the journal and sat in silence. Tears streamed down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. For the first time, he understood. His father wasn't a villain. He wasn't selfish or uncaring. He was just a man who had been broken by loss and didn't know how to put himself back together.